Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage founder and conference chair of Blackhat, Jeff Moss.
So am I Luke or am I Darth Vader? I'm not sure. It depends on the day, I guess, or who's asking. So welcome everyone. You are at the 15th Blackhat. 15th we've held here in Vegas. And for 14 of those years we've been here at Caesars, and the hotel has been growing almost as fast as we have. And as you can tell, we're sort of bursting at the seams again. Another record year, which is always shocking to me because I've always thought from about the 5th Blackhat, I was like, okay, this is about it. You know, I mean, I think back then it was like that many people. I was like, well, this is about as many people who care about information security as there are on the whole planet. They can get on an airplane and come to Vegas. So this is it. That's pretty cool. That's how big the industry is. And then every year we grew and grew. So I'm wondering, is this it? Or is there more? Right? At the 20th, are we going to have double the space? I mean, just how many people care about this? And the answer is pretty much everybody. I mean, my mom cares about it now. Everybody cares about it. And if you're, with my role in Washington, D.C. a little bit more now, all of a sudden everybody cares about it there. You have people like reading crib sheets on the subway, trying to work the word cyber into their conversations. It's really kind of creepy. And my latest career advice from somebody who didn't know what I did, they said, you know, cyber's so hot, I'm trying to work it in with my normal keywords for my job to stay relevant at work. So now instead of saying the bad guys are using the botnet to control something, I'll say, you know, the cyber C2 for the bad guys. And I'll sound, you know, more relevant. Okay. C2, I'm thinking I might have to have like a career advice track or something. So, before we get started, I want to say a couple of words. I want to thank our sponsors. We have 3 diamond sponsors this year, and you know, Microsoft is one of them. They've been a long-time supporter, and you know, 10 years ago when they had their giant moment when they realized security was sort of important, they have come so far. I mean, remember, they are the example sort of in the industry of, you know, the SDLC. They show what can happen when a company puts their mind behind security, because every time they do something to raise the bar, they're actually sort of raising all the ships on the ocean. You know, everybody's boat floats higher from efforts they make. So I want to thank them for recognizing Blackhat and supporting us. Looking Glass and Qualys. Now Qualys has been also a long-time supporter, over 10 years, and I was talking to Philippe, the CEO, I'm sure many of you know, and he was remarking that they were sort of doing cloud before it was called cloud. You know, I think it was called software as a service, and it's probably called something before that, but currently it's called cloud. And they really pioneered moving a lot of their logic into the cloud. And so I want to thank them for recognizing the value of Blackhat and wanting to support us, which really means supporting us all with the speakers that we get to hear. Now before I introduce Philippe, who's going to introduce the keynote, Shawn Henry, who's going to talk about a topic that I hope is somewhat controversial, sort of this concept of bringing the fight to the enemy, or maybe in my early days, 15 years ago, I was working at a company called Secure Computing Corporation. And they made this firewall, which back then was like the coolest firewall on the planet. And it was called the Sidewinder. And everybody remembers the snake. And the feature of Sidewinder is it had strike back. And what strike back did is you could create rules on the firewall. So if it saw certain types of activities, you could program in C or Perl or whatever, or take from a pre-generated list, strike back actions. So it could like dig and ping and trace route and send out alerts. Or you could have it like DOS something. And you know, strike back was whatever you wanted it to do. And I thought this was the coolest thing in the world. I would have it, somebody would attack my firewall. And remember, 15 years ago there weren't that many attacks on the net. Somebody attacked my firewall, it would send out alerts to my pager, because I didn't have a cell phone. And it would page all my other friends who were interested and send out the IP address to all my friends of the people who were attacking me. And it'd be like 2 in the morning, you'd get a beep and you'd look at it, and all of a sudden your friends all over the planet would like start hammering on that IP. I was like mechanical, it was like the manual strike back. But there were these customers in Colombia and who paid for their Sidewinder in cash in a suitcase. And you know, they weren't interested in support, they just, you know, give me the box. No, I'd like the box. And their strike back feature set was quite extreme. They didn't have to worry about laws or anything. So it's 15 years later, and here we are talking about essentially strike back again, but we're talking about it in a different context. And when I think about this, a couple of ideas come to mind. One is, I'm not a government. So I'm not a nation state, I don't have treaties, I don't have force of military, so what can I do? You know, I can't print money, I can't raise an army. But I can hire lawyers. They're almost as good. So what I've been advising people to do is sort of take on this I call it the Facebook defense, because it was pioneered by, as far as I know, it was pioneered by Max Kelly when he was at Facebook. And the idea was just sue people. And so if you find a lot of spammers, and you know, you do the due diligence and you hunt them down and you get all the information you can, you sue them civilly. And if you get it wrong, it's sort of, well, no harm, no foul. You're on the hook for the legal costs, so you pay that. But as a company, it's not the same as criminal. You haven't locked them up. So one way to take the fight to the enemy is you just sue them. And if they're in another country, and it doesn't work out, maybe you get a judgment. So maybe they're in another country that doesn't have a treaty with us. That's fine. It's going to force civil society in the United States to work with civil society in that country, the judiciary and legal systems to cooperate, and it's going to start hammering out what it means to have cyber-related laws in these different countries. And maybe that alone is what's really important. See, because when the governments are doing it, they're talking very top-level treaties. What I need in my life, as a civilian, is I need all the civilian law to be lined up, the civil law. And so, maybe just merely by suing people, some of that will happen. So that's one idea I've been thinking about. The other one is, well, what can you do? You, as an individual, if you're not a government, well, you can donate your time. Just like Microsoft radically improved the security in their operating systems, you can donate your time, help raise the bar in the open source software area. You can donate your time to FreeBSD, Linux, whatever your project of choice is, Tor. And by doing that, you're also raising all the boats in the water. Everybody who depends on FreeBSD for some embedded device, all of a sudden that will be slightly better. You can do that to help sort of raise the immunity level. And then finally, with Philippe introducing Shawn, you know, maybe that we need some white blood cells out there. Some people or companies who are willing to kind of go the extra step, kind of live on the edge and push the envelope, see what's possible in sort of changing the paradigm and focusing on the people, the threat actors, instead of just focusing on the robots. I mean, you could have made my life miserable if you just kept hammering my Sidewinder with spoofed packets. You'd be beeping me all day long, but bad guys weren't that clever back then. You know, nowadays my strategy wouldn't work. I'd need a new one. So I'd like to introduce Philippe Courteau from Qualys, a long-time sponsor, long-time supporter, a lot of energy. He's very active in the security area, and he cares very passionately about the industry. And so I'd like to introduce Philippe, who will introduce the man who will talk about the white blood cells. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy your 15th Blackhat here, and I'll see you tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning to you all, and thank you very much, Jeff, for this very nice introduction. Indeed, Blackhat is dear to my heart and to all of us at Qualys, and I think fundamentally because it brings the best mind in our industry, you know, to share their experience. At a time when we unfortunately, all of us know that the asymmetry between attackers and defenders has widened, it's even more important to know our enemies. and to know them better. And there is no really other way than knowing them well than to infiltrate them or to engage them. So sitting in your cubicles trying to figure out what they do or through market surveys doesn't really work. So with this in mind, it's with a great pleasure that I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker, which brings his 24 years of real experience at the FBI as the executive director, and someone also which very uniquely, and rather than after 24 years of service, didn't really choose the easy way to go to a Fortune 500 company and enjoy a big office and a big staff, but rather to join a very innovative startup company that George Kirst recently started. So with this, it's with a great pleasure to introduce Shawn Henry. Shawn.
Stand by. I have control. 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right. Good morning. That is like the onomatopoeia, all those booms, and these guys in the front row are saying, dude, I told you not to stay out so late. 24 years in the FBI, and my most recent position as the executive assistant director, and I had the honor and privilege of leading the critical incident response group, of which the FBI's hostage rescue team is a part of. HRT is the best trained, the best prepared, the best equipped, and the most elite civilian tactical team in the world, anywhere in the world. And I thought that it would be appropriate for me to talk this morning about some of the things I've done throughout my 24-year career in the FBI, not just in the cyber environment, but also in the physical world, and some of the lessons that I learned and how we transfer those things over to computer network security. Because I think that there's an awful lot that we can learn from history that we move forward, and we shouldn't always reinvent the wheel. I've learned a lot of lessons in my time. One is that we need warriors to fight our enemy. We need warriors. And particularly in the cyber environment, like right now, where we need people like you to be the best trained, the best prepared, the best equipped, and an elite fighting force because of the adversaries that we're facing. I also learned that you play the way you practice. And that team that practices day in and day out, on the water, in helicopters, on the land, foreign and domestic locations, with the military and without the military, they're preparing all the time so that when they meet their adversary, they're able to defeat their adversary. Like we all need to prepare all the time. And a situation like Blackhat, where we're learning new techniques, emerging threats, how do we defeat them? In the organizations that you work in, where we need to be having training exercises regularly. We need to talk have tabletop exercises. So when things break bad, we know how to respond. Really, really, really critical. I learned firsthand the need for training when I was doing the tactical exercise about 20 years ago. And it was a training exercise, and we had these flashbangs that you kind of roll into the room, right? They're stun grenades, concussion grenades, lots of light, big sound. And the idea is to throw the adversary off so you could get into the room safely. And it was my very first training exercise. And I was really eager and enthusiastic. And I was lined up on the door as the number one guy getting ready to go in the door. And when the door gets breached, you're supposed to wait 1 second for the bang to go in. But I was so eager and enthusiastic that I went in. And that bang went off while I was standing right over the top of it. And I can tell you, I never did that again. So you play the way you practice. You've got to constantly train. So let me discuss some of the lessons about what I learned and what I think we need to do. The FBI has fought against adversaries for more than 100 years. Organized crime groups, white-collar crime, corrupt public officials, drug gangs, spies and terrorists. And in my career, I think I've seen more similarities between the physical world and the cyber world. They're not that much different, quite honestly. Certainly, the tactics are a little different, but the theories are very similar. And I think we can learn a lot. At the end of the day, we're not talking about computers attacking computers. That's not happening unilaterally. We're talking about human beings who are sitting behind a keyboard. We're talking about human beings who are developing strategies. We're talking about human beings who are identifying your organization to target you. So it's human beings. And so many of the things that I think that we've done successfully, not just in the FBI, but in law enforcement and in the intelligence community, we can apply to this space. There have been many substantial changes in the FBI since 9/11. And those changes were primarily put into place to thwart terrorist attacks, kinetic terrorist attacks, bombs going off and people being killed. But a lot of those theories we applied in my organization to the cyberspace. My team adopted, adapted, assimilated, and used many of those techniques. And I think that some of those techniques we can also apply in the commercial space. Let me talk for a couple of minutes about the threat. And I know we all have heard about the threat, and I know we've talked about the threat. Many of you have seen the threat day to day. But I think when we talk about this, it doesn't hurt to go through it again quickly, because we've got to constantly remind ourselves about how significant this threat is. I believe that the threat from C&E, computer network exploitation, and computer network attack is the most significant threat that we face as a society. And I'm not saying as a country, but as a society, as a civilized world. Other than a weapon of mass destruction going off, I believe that it's the most significant threat. Everything that we do, research and development, all of our intellectual property, our corporate strategies, corporate communications, everything we do is stored or transmitted electronically. That's the way we do business. The DNA of your companies is available to the bad guy. That to me is a significant threat. The average person hears about the unclassified environment. Now this group is a little different. But the average person hears about the loss of PII, and they hear about a website defacement, and they hear about somebody who lost $1,500 out of their bank account, or some university that lost 10,000 usernames and passwords. That's what they hear. But the reality of it is, the vast majority of what's happening in this space is not heard by people outside of the classified environment. The vast majority of what occurs in the classified environment. I've equated it to an iceberg. The aggregate of this threat is an iceberg. And the water line is the line of demarcation between the unclassified environment and the classified environment. And we all know when you look at a 3D of an iceberg, that little piece in the unclassified environment is about that big. and 90% is underneath the water line. I've seen below the water line. I've been circling it in a submarine for the last 5 years. And I've seen below that water line. So I think that threat is real. I still hear from CEOs, why would I be a target? Why would somebody come after me? And they don't necessarily understand the full gravity of the situation. I believe that a major attack could negate a company, and I've seen it happen. A company in business one day suffers a substantial attack over the weekend, and on Monday they're out of business. When they lose several $1 million and their job is to provide credit to small organizations. And I see it every single day. In the Bureau, I've seen it multiple times per day, particularly in the classified environment, where these threats and these attacks are much broader and much deeper. Very, very substantial. So who's the adversary? There are lots of different adversaries. Cyber is the great equalizer. For years and years, our adversaries were different organizations, different countries with big military might. And today, with a $500 laptop and an internet connection, anybody, anywhere in the world can attack any government, any organization, any company from anywhere, sitting in their pajamas in their living room. And the last I checked, the number of people who had a computer and an internet connection was about 2.3 billion people. So the pool of adversaries is constantly expanding. Organized crime groups have migrated their traditional tactics to the network. And they are hitting primarily the financial services sector to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And they're moving into retail, and they're moving into manufacturing, and they're looking at IPR, not just PII, but at IPR, because they can sell it. And they are becoming more strategic in what they do. The most sophisticated ones are not much less than state sponsors, in my opinion, based on what I've seen. Their capabilities. They're defeating two-factor authentication. They're augmenting their capabilities. They are overcoming the defenses that are being put up against them. There are terrorist groups who are online now calling for the use of cyber as a weapon. I've talked about terrorist groups before, and people have said, they don't have the capabilities. They're not really looking to do that. And I believe that if we wait, it's too late. People are never going to fly planes into buildings. What do we got to worry about that for? They're talking about people sewing bombs into their body to get on an airplane. Well, that'll never happen until it happens, and then it's too late, and then everybody wants to know why you weren't doing something about it. It's a threat, and it's something that we need to be concerned about, the threat to industrial control systems, and we're seeing an uptick in that as well. Recent DHS piece talked about some of the things that they've seen regarding industrial control systems and some of the actual threats to or attempts at those devices that control our critical infrastructure. Because the adversary knows that if you want to harm civilized society, take their water away. Do away with their electricity. It is a significant threat. It's something that we have to be concerned about. We have to be thinking about it today and not 2 weeks after it occurs. There are organizations that are quietly marketing hacking as a service. So even if organizations don't today have the capability themselves, they can lease it. They can buy it. People are selling tools and they're selling their capabilities to the highest bidder. And that is quietly happening. There's a lone wolf, what I call disenfranchised people, disgruntled employees, the potential insider, that are looking at your networks. And I've seen many more of those, again, in the last year or so, where we've seen those start to rise. And finally, foreign intelligence services, which in my opinion is the most significant threat today, not necessarily in the future, but today. There are dozens of foreign nations that have computer network offensive capabilities. And they are actively seeking the information off of your networks every single day. They're looking for a competitive advantage. They are taking the information and they are supporting their homegrown businesses. They're stealing corporate strategies every single day. It's like playing poker with a marked deck when you sit down to have a negotiation with a company that's working or housed in another country, and that nation's computer network operations have taken all of your strategy before you've sat down, and they've got the answers to the test before the negotiations start. I talked previously about a company that we saw that lost $1 billion of IPR, 10 years worth of research and development in the course of a weekend, a couple of days. And that is not an isolated event. That is happening. It's not just the confidentiality of the organizations that's at risk. The adversaries, the penetration that they're making and the depth that they're making into organizations provides them the opportunity to change data. It provides them the opportunity to shut off networks. The very data, the integrity of the data is at risk. The confidence that you have and your organization has and your executives have is at risk, that you may not be able to rely on the data. Because it's not just that somebody viewed it, they didn't just touch the file, they added something to it, or they manipulated it, they changed it. And there's a constant movement to continue to push data to the network. So one of the things I learned in the FBI is there are certain things that we don't put on the network. There is information from informants. There is information that we collect off of digitally authorized intercepts, court authorized intercepts. There's information about sensitive investigative techniques. That doesn't all need to be on the network. It doesn't need to be accessible to everybody. We can control who sees, access control, who sees what's on those networks. I don't understand why more companies aren't compartmenting some of the data. I get the technology, I understand. We invested a lot of money. It's really important for us to put this information out. We want to show everybody that we're moving forward with technology. I get that. But I think we need to do it in a strategic way. We've been focused on defense for a long time. And defense in depth is absolutely, positively necessary. But it is failing if we are focused solely on perimeter defense. It is failing. It is not the sole holy grail. It is not the secret sauce. It is a piece of a holistic approach. Because we know with the sophisticated adversary will jump over that fence. They're getting over the firewall, and they're inside, like an invisible man walking throughout the organization. I see it all the time. I can't tell you how many times FBI agents have been deployed on site. They knocked on the front door of an organization and told them that their network had been breached. And it was breached because we found all the company data outside the network. And we found the data outside the network in the course of a completely unrelated investigation. So we had the data. And we sat down with the CISO or the CIO, and they said it couldn't have happened. And lo and behold, after some evaluation, sure enough, it had happened. And in some cases, it had happened months ago. And in a couple of cases, it had happened years ago, meaning that the adversary had unfettered access to the network for years, unbeknownst to the people who own the network. That defense didn't work. There's something else that you got to do. And I don't think the private sector has traditionally focused on the threat. I believe that we have to mitigate the threat. Everybody's heard of the classic risk model. Risk equals threat times vulnerability times consequences. And if you can reduce or eliminate one to zero, then you've got no risk. But that won't happen. The status quo is unsustainable. The situation we're in is unsustainable. In the physical world, people are responsible for reducing their vulnerabilities. In the physical world, your corporations are responsible for locking their doors and having guards. But that's not always working in the private sector on the cyber side. The FBI, when I was there, could not respond to every single situation. Every time there was a breach, every time a company was broken into, every financial transaction that went bad because someone was committing a fraud. Not enough resources. Can't do it. You can't do it. So the FBI looks at mitigating the threat. We can't respond to every victim and make them whole, but what if we can prevent what happened by going after the threat? What if we could use proactive investigative techniques, undercover operations, informants, digital intercepts, lawful digital intercepts? You can't make every school and every mall, every university and every workplace impenetrable. It can't be done. Certainly not in our society. Maybe other societies you could do that, but not in this society. We live in an open society. And if we can't defend every mall and every school and every university and every workplace, then we've got to look at a different tactic, which is being aware of who the adversary is and stopping them in advance of them walking into a school, a mall, etc. How do we do that? Let's carry that to the cyber world, that theory to the cyber world. And I think we need to have a paradigm shift in the way we all do business. In the FBI post 9/11, we made significant changes in our organization. We were traditionally a domestic organization. We moved to a global organization, an international organization. We were primarily a law enforcement organization, but we moved to a law enforcement and a national security organization, to an intel organization. It was a paradigm shift. And we changed the way we measured our success. Because historically, the FBI measured its success by how many arrests we made, how many indictments we had, how many convictions. It wasn't about the threat. It was about how many numbers we could generate. How many people do we put in prison? That's great. It's wonderful. But are you putting the right people in prison? Are you stopping the highest priority threat? Because just merely generating a lot of numbers is not the answer. So we changed the metrics. It became dismantlements, preventions, sharing of intelligence that others can action. Perhaps not the FBI, but can others action it? The private sector, local law enforcement, foreign law enforcement. It's not just about the numbers. The old information security metric was, can we stop the adversary from getting onto the network? That's the measure that many people have used for years and years. And I would say that if that's the measure that you're using now and your bonus is tied to that, there's not going to be a lot of Christmas presents. Because the new performance measure is how long after the adversary gets access to my network before we identify them and mitigate the threat? And how do we change that delta? How do we narrow that? Because you've got to assume that the adversary is on the network. I assume that there are terrorists in this country. I know that there are organized crime groups. I know that there are spies in this country. Now, we can't prevent them from getting over the border. They're here. So what do? How do you change the way you perform? Intelligence is the key to all of this, in my opinion. Everything we do, whether you're chasing spies or terrorists or organized crime groups or cyber hackers, people that are involved in computer intrusions, intelligence is the key. The Bureau's made institutional changes. And I was proud of being there and proud of what occurred. They've made institutional changes. We moved from being case-driven, how many cases do you have, to being threat-driven. Who is the adversary and how do we get to them? It was a dynamic change, and I can tell you it was not without controversy. It's a hard deal to take 36,000 person organization and kind of put on its head that which had been done for about 97 years. That was a hard thing to do. But I really believe that those changes have made us safer. And I think we can do the same here in cyberspace. The intelligence cycle, looking at strategy. What do we need to do? What are the requirements that we need to collect against? What's the issue that we need to collect against? And then we talk about our collection. In the physical world, when we're looking for bad guys, it might be surveillance. It might be sources of information from the general public. It might be those intercepts or physical review of what's occurring. The intelligence model in cyber is about visibility. It's about visibility into the network. It's about what's happening on the network. In the FBI, we collected a lot of intelligence and we shared it at the NCIJTF, the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force. And the intelligence that was collected there was able to be shared with lots of partners, some of whom had the ability and the capability to action that intelligence that the FBI didn't for whatever reason, because of authorities or what have you. We can collect intelligence, we can analyze it, we can start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and then we have to execute it. We've collected lots of intelligence on the cyber side in the FBI and shared it through groups like the NCFTA, where the government has shared with the private sector. And there are other consortiums where we've shared intelligence with the private sector. But that's happening at human speed and not network speed. So the one fault that I see, unfortunately, and it's just a matter of a number of things. There's some policy issues, there's some technical issues about how that intelligence gets shared at network speed. Because you can't share millions of pieces of information human to human. That doesn't work. But if you think about the model and how it works, if you think about getting a better understanding of who your adversary is and what it is that they're doing day to day, it allows you to be much more strategic. We need to understand who the adversary is. Because if we understand who they are, we can take specific actions. We are not reacting. We can be proactive. We can't react. The adversary's capability and the adversary's access to the networks provides them with an advantage to us. We can't always see. They're able to get access to the network. They're able to identify what it is they want. They orient themselves. They take decisive action. And we're reacting too late. We're reacting too late. If we have the opportunity to collect intelligence, we can get out in front. I'm certain that we can. I've seen it done in the physical world many, many times, where intelligence has allowed us to get out in front. And we can do it in cyberspace. It's going to require some policy issues. It's going to require some technical solutions. But if you understand and believe in the theory, I absolutely believe there are a lot of smart people that can make this happen. Let me talk about this. We'll use a physical world example, a real world example, a terrorist example. What if I got intelligence in the FBI and I put out intelligence that said that there was a person who was going to bomb a manufacturing plant somewhere in the United States? Now that would raise people's awareness and they might increase security. But what if I was able to put out intelligence that said there's a woman between 28 and 30 years old who's looking to bomb a manufacturing plant? And she's got a tattoo on her left wrist. She's got shoulder-length dark hair. And she's going to do it sometime the first week of September. And she's doing it, she's going to be attacking an auto manufacturing plant, Acme Auto, because she's got concerns about global warming and how Western society is impacting the sub-Saharan African region of the world. Now, do you think that with that type of intelligence, we in law enforcement, in the FBI, and the intelligence community could be a lot more strategic in how we respond to that type of information? We could be a lot more strategic. The more granular intelligence we have, the more strategic we can be. It will allow us to become more resilient. It will allow us to absolutely be safer. In the FBI, we had limited resources. The FBI continues to have limited resources. You all have limited resources. Your CEOs and COOs and CISOs and CIOs, they've got a lot of money they want to place in a lot of different places, and you don't get it all, unfortunately. And you know that all too well. We've got to be able to prioritize the threats. And if we've got granular information, we can be more strategic. You can't protect against every single threat. So I believe that the intelligence, the granularity allows us to be more strategic. We have to constantly hunt for the adversary. Because I know that there's a woman between 28 and 30 who's going to blow up a manufacturing plant. That's good that I have that information. But I bet there are 5 more people like her who are going to be using similar techniques, maybe different weapons, maybe for a different reason. And I don't have all the intelligence. So it would be wonderful if we had all the intelligence all the time. We could be real strategic. But that's not the case. That's not the case. So we've got to constantly be hunting. We've got to constantly be looking for the tripwires. If you agree with the premise that the adversary has already breached the network, it's likely that there's somebody already there, then why aren't you looking for them? We've got to constantly be looking for them. In the physical world, if we respond to a physical event, an alarm goes off, your IDS goes off. It's not enough to watch that perimeter. We need to have somebody walking up and down the halls of the manufacturing plant, looking inside the vacant offices with a flashlight, constantly assessing. Are there changes? Is there something out of place? And in the cyber world, have files been touched? Have things been changed? Are we seeing anomalous behavior? In the physical world, if we don't have those indicators, those visual cues, we're not going to be able to respond. In the physical world, the police and the Department of Defense are responsible for protecting the country. They're responsible for protecting your neighborhood. They patrol your neighborhood. And the Department of Defense is responsible for protecting this country from an attack physically from another country. And in the cyber world, DHS has the responsibility and the authority to protect .gov. And NSA has the responsibility and the authority to protect .mil. And I have nothing but pride and confidence in my colleagues in DHS and NSA and other government agencies because I know that they're working really hard. But guess who's responsible? Authority and responsibility for protecting .com. Nobody. Nobody. Nobody has the authority to protect .com. People will respond. The FBI will respond if you got breached, but they're not actively, proactively monitoring the networks, looking for anomalous behavior. They're not looking for somebody sneaking over the border. They're not looking for somebody flying in with a foreign airplane. They're not looking for the missile because they're not monitoring .com. There are a lot of reasons for that. I get that. But it's something that we need to be aware of. In the physical world, companies help the government by fingerprints at the scene of a crime, by DNA, by surveillance cameras. They're able to help identify. In the cyber world, we need to do the same type of thing. Logging is the equivalent of video cameras. It provides greater visibility. Again, it's not the only answer, but it provides greater visibility. You've got to sight your adversary, sight them, get them in the sights. It's not just what happened. It's not just what they did. It's who did it, why they did it, and how do I get to them to take them out of the fight. Those HRT guys, you think they're looking saying, whoa, that was a 9mm, whoa, a 45. They want to know where the bullets are coming from so they can get down range and take them out of the fight. That's the only way to stop an aggressive adversary because they're not stopping on their own. They're continuing to come at you. Proactive. We need to be proactive. I am not talking about actively hacking back against other countries, other organizations. Unlike Jeff Moss, who apparently broke the law. I'll be chatting with him about that when we're done. We can be proactive on the network, on our network segment. We can be proactive. There's a lot that we can do to create a hostile environment for the adversary to operate in. There's a lot that we can do. Maybe it's denial and deception. Maybe we have corrupt packets somewhere. Maybe we have misinformation. Maybe if we know who the adversary is and we know what it is that they're looking for, because we're getting ready to do a merger or an acquisition in a foreign country, and somebody's told us that our network's been breached and we know the files they're looking to touch, maybe we serve it up. Wouldn't it be nice if when they sit down at the negotiating table, they got the wrong answers to the test? You remember that in college, right? Wrong answers to the test. That's a bad day when you don't have the information. What if we're able to cause the adversary pain? Because they spend 4 months getting access to your well-secured network, but they finally get in, and it cost them 2 0 days to get on there. And when they get back home, it's the wrong missile. It doesn't work. There's things that we can do. The HRT model calls for speed, surprise, action. And I think that there's a lot that we all can do on our network. HRT protects what's good and eliminates what's bad. They rescue hostages. They protect life. I would argue that your data is being held hostage and that the life of your organization is at risk. And you, as well-trained, well-equipped, elite cyber warriors, can have an impact. I think the stakes are high. When I talk about the power of intelligence, when I talk about us being proactive, I believe that the intelligence that we gain from these proactive operations, because we cause the adversary to move, because we take them off of their game, that allows us to collect intelligence. When they're moving outside of their normal course of business, they're making mistakes. They're doing things that they didn't plan to do. It's getting hot, and they're making changes. And by doing that, we can collect intelligence. And that intelligence allows us to predict where they're going to go. What is it that they're looking for? By disrupting them, you change the game. You have home field advantage. They don't know your network the way you do. You have home field advantage. We can get them to tip their hand, and we can raise their cost. Using that same philosophy, we can be preventive. Using that intelligence, we can make changes to our standard operating procedures. How we construct our network, where we put our most sensitive information. We can fix vulnerabilities before they get exploited if we have the intelligence on the front side. Something else that I learned in the FBI is the Constitution and civil liberties and privacy. Those are all really important, and I still believe them, even out of the FBI and the private sector, and we've got to uphold those. They're really important. I know there's some civil libertarians here that are like, we're going to set your sights on you, Henry. Really important. We have to be respectful of that. One of the other things that I've learned is the value of partnerships, and particularly when we're talking about sharing intelligence, how absolutely critical partnerships are. I'm talking about partnerships, federal government to state and local government. I'm talking about partnerships, government to the private sector to private sector, government to foreign governments to private sector. It's a holistic response because everybody's got some intelligence that provides indicators that identify who the adversary is. And we need to call them out. We need to call the adversaries out. We talk about a couple of cases, I think, that are symbolic of taking some action. And some of the things I think the Bureau did that were game-changing and did tip the scales a little bit. Operation Core Flood, working in partnership with Microsoft and the private sector and other law enforcement agencies, we were able to disable a botnet that was being run. There was about 2 million bots on the net that were infected with malware. It was an organized crime group. They were stealing PII. It was primarily financial services sector. But the Bureau got a court order to take over the domain names, to seize the domain names, and then working with a private entity, put new domain name servers onto the network. So those 2 million bots that were infected with that malware were not connecting through the adversary's domain name service, and the adversary's domain name service shifted all the traffic through advertising sites that they had lined up. So this was a strict financial fraud case. It was an organized crime group. I think they stole, I want to say about $14 million. These bots were in over 100 countries. But by seizing the servers, we're able to change the game by impacting the adversary's infrastructure, by moving them out of their comfort zone. It cost them a lot of money to acquire that network, and it moved them out of their comfort zone. One of the other, at the end of that case, Microsoft, after the domain name server, the DNS server was taken over, Microsoft, to Jeff's point, them getting much more involved and as great partners working with the private sector, use their malicious software removal tool to remediate those boxes so that they couldn't recommunicate. So that was, in my mind, a great partnership. Rove Digital is another botnet, again, somewhat unique, working in partnership with the Estonian government in a collaborative way. A group of Estonians who had redirected users' DNS servers to ones that they controlled. Just a huge operation where servers were seized, the infrastructure was taken down, the adversaries were eventually arrested, but it was a pretty significant group. There are many other examples like this on the national security side, where there have been proactive operations, where the adversary's been identified and operations have been put in place to get them out of their comfort zone. The threat is increasing, and we are constantly changing. The adversary is changing their ways every single day. We need a paradigm shift in the way we do things, the way we employ security. And the lessons that we've learned, both from the FBI and the government, some of their positive efforts can absolutely be applied in this sector. Not only do you need to understand your own organization, you have to understand your own organization. You also have to understand your adversary. So I read a quote from Sun Tzu, famous Chinese war guy. He said, if you don't know yourself and you don't know your enemy, you will be imperiled in every battle. If you don't know yourself and you don't know your enemy. If you do know yourself, but you don't know your enemy, you'll win one and you'll lose one. But if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. I think that's pretty important. You've got to understand who your adversary is. If you don't know what you're going up against, how can you possibly defend it? If you don't know what they're targeting, how can you protect it? I thought this quote was important. Find out where your enemy is. Get at him as soon as you can. Strike him hard as you can and keep moving. From another famous Chinese philosopher. It says Ulysses S. Grant for you guys in the back. Really, really important in my mind for us to learn about history, for us to use the lessons that our forefathers, those that have come before us, have already lived through and already gone through. We've lived this fight. It might not have been electronic, but we've lived this fight. We've fought adversaries in many battles, many different times. Why don't we learn from what we've done? We can. And there's an awful lot that you all can do individually to make a difference in this space. I am going to take some questions. And Trey Ford, who's been running this show, has taken Twitter questions over the course of the last few weeks. And I'm going to answer some questions now that Trey is going to read to me. I know they've been coming in throughout the last couple of days as well. In fact, he told me he's got some this morning. So Trey.
Hey, Shawn, we've only got time for one question. We've got a question that came in from Ian Trump via LinkedIn. The question states, too big to manage. Bring your own device, Armageddon, or opportunity. Shawn, without using the word cyber, can you share an example of how you are seeing mobile devices used against us?
How do we see mobile devices used against us? I see mobile devices used against us every day. Mobile device can be used as an attack vector. It can also be used as an offensive tool. I think that it's just a natural extension of the network, and I think that we've got to treat it similarly to the way we treat the rest of our network. So I think that mobile devices are a continued emerging threat. I know that there's an awful lot of new capabilities that are being exploited currently, and it's something that we have to continue to use. All right, that was one question. Let me finish up. The adversary is doing what they're going to do, okay? They're doing what they're going to do. And it is unlikely to change in the short term. But there are things that are in your sphere of influence that you can change. We are in a historic time in history right now. And the actions that you take now are going to define where we are in 20 years. The government is not able to independently solve this problem. Because I think that this is probably the first time in history where civilians are on the front line of the battle every single day. And that is you. And I have tremendous respect for people who have the passion and the enthusiasm and the energy to meet their adversary every single day. I worked with people like that in the FBI who sacrificed themselves. They sacrificed their time with their family, and they were committed to their cause. And I implore all of you to be committed to your cause, because the stakes are too high. And I believe that our failure to step up now is going to mean a failure for society. I've talked to FBI agents for years, and I always talk about the thin line that separates good from evil in society. It's a thin line. And I implore them to hold that line tight, to stand on it shoulder to shoulder. Because our failure to do so means people are going to get hurt and people are going to die. And I look at the cyber world, and I look at where we all are, and I can only ask that you stand side by side to protect that line between good and evil. And people might think I'm being dramatic, but I believe it. I believe it. You have a responsibility and you have an obligation to your company, to your customers, to your families, to your coworkers. You have an obligation. Because if we don't do that, bad things are going to happen. This is your time to step up. And together, we can change this game. I believe that. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your week.
I have a quick announcement to make talking about change. Blackhat's going to go through a little bit of change, and we need your help to do so. We're sending out a questionnaire on Monday to everyone, and we're going to gather this feedback, and it's going to help change or chart the future course of Blackhat. So when you see this email, no, it's not a phishing attempt. It's just please take some time next week once you get it and give us your honest advice and answers to the questions, and we'll use that information to move forward. So please take the time, and I appreciate all of your responses, whether they're good or bad. Thank you very much, and enjoy the conference.